Now it's time for the next edition of Schopen-Beard, Horror of the Tabletop. Hope you guys enjoy. So without further ado, let's get started. By this point, I've known Schopen-Beard for about 4 months, in which I had, apart from the past entries, some minor cringy encounters, like his usual demeaning comments to women, or as he puts it, cattle, his attempts at black humor, or that X is retarded, or things like that. This encounter happened the following semester, where more of my high school friends entered university. Naturally, I wanted to introduce them to my uni friends, Mr. Wild, Mr. Logic, and Miss LaCane, but that didn't work. Except for Miss LaCane and Ozzybeard, my beard light friend, that went to the same high school. Unfortunately, that also meant that the bearded shadow, Schopen-Beard, who for some unknown reason decided to double major in theology. Maybe he wanted to debunk them from the inside with his euphoria? Anyways, since he tended to stick to people, I met many theology majors that were also shadowed by Schopen-Beard. Although, the only one that I kind of befriended was a former junkie who found God and wanted to be a Lutheran pastor. I began to ramble on about my past D&D campaigns around him, and he decided to try and play it. So I offered my humble services as a GM. He gladly accepted. But he was also kind of close to Schopen-Beard, who also wanted to play too. So I allowed him for the campaign too. To fill the remaining spots, I invited 2 of my high school friends, Mr. Sorcerer, my cousin, and absolute best friend, and Ozzybeard. Now we managed to go for 2 sessions before it all blew up. With that said, I'll introduce the new cast. Ozzybeard. He's one of my best friends. He's 5'8", chubby, long curly black hair, splotches of hair on his face, and he dresses in all black, like a metalhead or goth style. He looks like a neckbeard, but he's actually nice and self-aware, just enough to avoid behaving like a complete neckbeard. He changed the bearded entitlement for nihilism, and fascination with the occult, and general edginess. He's obsessed with cinema, or Kino, as you call it, Black Sabbath, and all things metal. The Sorcerer. He's my cousin, and my best friend to this day. He's 6'1", average weight, long Jesus-style brown hair and a beard. He wears nerdy shirts and pants. He's an all-around nerd. He's a master of nerddom, and he GMs, hence his nickname. He's a literature major, absolute bro, very kind and compassionate. He's a smoker of the devil's lettuce, and an aspiring fantasy and cosmic horror writer. Mr. Luther. He's an ex-junkie turned man of God. He's majoring in theology, so he can be a pastor. He's 6'3", skinny, has Jesus-style brown hair, but is clean-shaven. He wears normal basic t-shirts, a jacket, pants, and shoes. He's a good enough guy, although sometimes kind of beardy. He liked black humor, and he's a hater of SJWs, just like his friend Schopen-Beard, but with a more tolerable measure, since he didn't top it off with misogyny or constantly harassed people with unwanted monologues. With the cast introduced, I shall proceed to give on to some tabletop neckbeard cringe, horror at the tabletop. As I said, at this point, our beard had started his double major in theology and philosophy. In his first semester, he met Mr. Luther, and he introduced him to me. One day I was talking with Ozzybeard and the Sorcerer about a past D&D campaign, where we basically became a band of edgy murder hobos that destroyed the political stability of the world that the Sorcerer prepared for us, since the party leader was a schizoid neutral evil, warlock, which was made by me. I know, but at the time of the campaign, I was an edgelord and a borderline neckbeard. Schopen-Beard and Mr. Luther overheard our conversation, and they both began asking questions about D&D, which we happily answered. After about an hour of nerding out, I had a great idea of running a campaign. We do this in our free time at university. Surely that'll end well, right? Wrong. Oh, I was so wrong. The campaign lasted exactly 2 sessions. First, a list of the endgame characters. Ozzybeard played his classic, homeless, dirty, antisocial ranger. The Sorcerer played the standard, classic knight in shining armor. Mr. Luther played an unforgiving cleric. with a hatred for the undead. Most of the interactions will be in character, unless otherwise stated. Schopen-Beard played a half-orc wizard that ended up being that guy. You know, the one who tries to screw everything that moves, even if it means derailing the quest and creating problems for the party for no other reason than roleplay. The first session wasn't so bad, although half of it is about getting the party together. The second half was a generic hunt for a necromancer that would lead to a necromantic takeover of the realm. We settled into a study room at the university library, and we began the adventure. It all started, as any good campaign does, with the good old tavern and inn, where they were summoned by a mysterious figure that promised great riches for adventurers. The first one to arrive was Beachfront and the sorcerer. After a brief discussion and interaction, they sat at the table, waiting for the mysterious figure. After some time, Mr. Luther arrived. He was sent by his parish to investigate the necromantic activity. He showed the summoning letter to the bartender, who pointed him to the table where Beachfront and the sorcerer were sitting. He approached and introduced himself, then he sat down. Finally, Schopen-Beard arrived, and he went straight for the barmaid that were serving drinks, and he said,
Well, what do we have here? You're a godsend of a wench. Fetch me those jugs, will you?
Well, he was pointing at the jugs of beer, suspiciously close to her chest. And he performed his famous Sandashi Shuraiku. That should have been a warning of the upcoming train crash, but I thought...
It's his first time. That's a pretty usual thing that happens.
So I ignore it. The barmaid, of course, rejected his advances and inquired about what he wanted.
Nothing. Just a little, while looking at his crotch.
Luckily, the sorcerer went to the rescue.
Oh, hello. You must also be an adventurer. Come here.
And he gestured his hand. Schopen-Beard, to my surprise, answered the call, but left this gem.
I'll be back, wench. See you soon.
He licked his lips before letting out his signature laugh. When they were all seated at the table, introductions were in order. After Schopen-Beard introduced himself as an Epicurean wizard, basically a nihilist, hedonistic based in a bad reading of Epicureanism, the mysterious figure arrived. They saw a tall man in a black cloak approaching.
Greetings, adventurers. Thank you for answering my summons. I trust that you had no issues finding the tavern.
After a couple of seconds, he continued.
The necromancer that I need disappeared is in a cave 2 days east from here. Look for a blue tree and you shall find him.
And with that, he up and left the tavern. It was late, so they rented rooms and they rested for the night. Except for Schopen-Beard. He wanted to bang the wench, so he approached the counter and he said,
Wench, remember me? We have unfinished business.
And the waitress said,
Sorry, do you need anything else? I'm closing in for the night.
Undeterred, our bearded friend replied,
My chambers now. I won't say it again.
This was kind of in character, so I allowed the interaction to continue. Besides, the rest of the party was watching attentively, so I continued the roleplay.
No, sorry, I'm married, but there is a brothel a few blocks from here.
He gleefully exclaimed out of character.
OP, I go to the brothel and spend the night there.
So I concede, and I sent him on his way. The morning came, and with the party formed up, I embarked on the adventure to the necromancer's lair. They marched for a day and a half, until they reached a tree with green and blue leaves. It was spotted by Beachfront, and indeed, there was a cave nearby. They set up camp for the night. They rested, and entered the cave at the break of dawn. The cave was dark and damp. Lucky for our intrepid adventurers, Mr. Luther cast light on his mace, so they basically had a lantern. They saw some bones laying around on the inside, and they arrived at a stone door at the end of the cave. If you thought dungeon, you thought right. The sorcerer was scratching his beard. And he said,
That looks like a dungeon. How are we going to pass this door?
Then Schopen-Beard said,
Fingers crossed for a sex dungeon.
We all cringed, and we ignored his comment. Beachfront replied with a coarse voice,
Smells like evil to me.
Then Mr. Luther exclaimed,
Fear not. I say to the evil lock, I shall break it with the fury of the sun.
Then he cast Detect Evil, and he detected undead presences, but no evil blocking the door. So the sorcerer, being a veteran, said to Schopen-Beard, to try to detect magic. Schopen-Beard gleefully said out of character.
I cast it, OP.
Then I replied.
All right. Roll for it.
He did, and it passed the check.
You detect a blocking spell at the door. What do?
I break the spell.
Good thinking. Okay, you must dispel magic.
He rolls a very good roll, so he broke the spell. After they entered the dungeon, it was very straightforward. A corridor with a door at the end. Schopen-Beard all willy-nilly entered, but the sorcerer pulled him back by his tunic.
There may be traps ahead. Ozzy, do your thing.
Ozzy began smelling for traps, and indeed, he found a couple of wire-triggered guillotines. He disarmed them with just an average roll, then they reached the final door. The sorcerer, in knightly fashion, destroyed it. They saw a cowled figure who said,
"So, I see someone found me. Well, never mind you. You will be undead before you know it."
He raised his hand, and they were surrounded by 7 zombies. The sorcerer engaged 2, while Ozzybeard engaged 1, and Mr. Luther 2 more, leaving 2 to Schopen-Beard, who instead of casting, trashed them with a dagger. I know, half-orc, and luck was on his side. After disposing the undead, the necromancer said,
"I need further preparation for this."
But before he could escape, Mr. Luther bolted, rolling a nat 20, and destroyed his skull with a holy mace. After the heroic but rushed action, they were like the fishes in the plastic bag on the Nemo movie, asking themselves, "What now?" And Ozzybeard said,
"Time for looting."
We found a note, summoning him to a big necromancer reunion that was about a week travel south. At this point, we'd already played for like 4 hours, so I ended the session satisfied, although a bit scarred from a bit of cringe. We got up and we said our goodbyes and we left. Although the next session, my patience ended, so did the campaign, thanks to Schopen-Beard. After that, we booked our calendars for the second session. And so, a week or so later, we gathered in the study room in the theology facility, courtesy of Mr. Luther, and we sat for the adventure. Little did we know of the brewing storm, and how I abandoned my happy and easygoing DMing to become a punishing god. After finding the note, the party discussed the next course of action. The sorcerer took the stage and proclaimed,
It's high time we chase this band of necromancers of the world and, as a bonus, get well paid.
Mr. Luther replied,
High time indeed! They shall be smitten by the true unforgiving light of God!
Then Ozzybeard said,
"Don't know. Something smells fishy. Like that smelly smell that smells. We should head back to the cantina and find our employer. Besides, the trip needs extra funding or a raise."
Schopen-Beard, with a serious tone, said,
Agreed. Besides, there's still a winch to pump.
We all went silent, and after a few seconds, the sorcerer uttered,
"'Tis best to keep moving. The sooner we stop the menace, the better."
After a few minutes of deliberation, the party decided to follow the trail and to stop the necromantic threat. Schopen-Beard reluctantly agreed, and they exited the cave to head south. But never fear, our intrepid neckbeard still had some cringe up his sleeve. After 2 days on the road, they arrived at a small town so that they could resupply and hopefully get a good night's rest. Of course, they went straight to the tavern, which unfortunately for Schopen-Beard had no winches, only a barman. They entered it, and it was very empty, save a couple of tables where there were sad and tired farmers that sat drinking in silence. Schopen-Beard, as he entered, broke the ice.
Bring me a flagon of beer and your best winches.
The barman, unimpressed, said with a somber tone,
Afraid you aren't gonna find any women in this town. They all just mysteriously disappeared.
The sorcerer said with a gasp.
Could this be related to black magic?
The barman replied, maintaining a somber tone.
I don't know. All's very messy. The only thing I know for sure was the gallops we heard the night it happened.
Ozzybeard said in a rugged tone.
Sounds like raiders to me.
Mr. Luther casted a detect evil or good. Good roll, but he didn't sense any hand of evil. He said to the party,
Probably. No evil of necromantic kind could be sensed around.
Schopen-Beard with a grin said,
Surely there's a female left in town.
I obliged him, but I did what I felt would be best to avoid any complications, and maybe block his lust and have a pleasant game. So the barman replied,
Only the little girls are left. They were at least spared their innocence.
I see. Interesting.
Then, with the glee of a child that was opening a present at Christmas, he shouted,
Lolly feast!
The sorcerer and I cringed. Ozzybeard laughed, as well as Mr. Luther. And with that, you guessed it, he engaged in the dreaded Sendashi Shiraiku. Our eardrums were shattered, the windows cracked, and a bunch of theological facility members just stared at us. Our time had come. A high-ranking facility member threatened to evict us from the premises. Luckily for us, Mr. Luther and I immediately apologized and vowed not to disturb again. That was very close. I reprimanded Schopen-Beard.
Please try to avoid doing that, or else the game will be ruined.
He answered without a shred of guilt, sorrow, or shame.
Yeah, just spare me your PMSing.
I popped a little vein in my forehead. He was starting to get on my nerves. One more beardy action from him, and he will meet the spite and the punishment of the vengeful DM. Containing my anger, I said,
Let's try to continue, but please everyone, let's try to be less noisy.
And we continued. The barman was shocked and terrified, and reached for something under the counter, and he said, What'd you say? My daughter is of them. The sorcerer, as the kind soul that he was, jumped in, and he profusely apologized for the companion's comment. After some convincing speech rolls and a few coins for the inconvenience, they agreed to give us lodging for the night, except for Schopen-Beard, who had to sleep in the barn. Before going to rest, the sorcerer, as he is the knight, inquired the party.
Should we help this village, or do we keep going, my friends?
Coarsely, Ozzybeard said,
You think they'll pay us?
Mr. Luther replied,
Pay or no pay, necromancers and undead must be slain. Let's move on.
Schopen-Beard added,
Yeah, won't give us anything. Not damsels, wenches, or pay. This village is a hole. We should move on.
The sorcerer left and asked about pay, and there was none to be had, except for lodging and food, as long as they protected the village and hunted for the kidnappers. He communicated that to the party, and they decided to move on. After that, they were tired enough to sleep. In the morning, they had breakfast and they left the village, and they kept on their pursuit south. They reached a small outpost, so that they could rest for the night. The outpost had a small population of 50 people, mostly farmers and a couple of town's guards. As they arrived, they saw many of them dressed in rags, sick and wounded. Mr. Luther began to heal those that accepted God as their savior and pledged themselves to his might. Ozzybeard and the sorcerer armed the camp and spoke with the town guards, who explained that the same mysterious attack of horsemen and a plague had befallen, and that they housed many refugees. They gave them some coins and they sat by the fireplace. Schopen-Beard, you guessed it, asked,
Are the women in the outpost hot?
Innocently, I replied,
Yes, some are, although most are in rags, dirty, wounded, or sick.
and he answered out of character.
I roll to search the hottest one.
Annoyed, I replied as a GM.
Fine, roll.
He rolled a 21. Respecting the will of the dice, I say,
You see a very beautiful figure tending to the wounded. She is dressed as a nun, with porcelain skin, blue eyes, and full lips.
He proclaimed triumphantly.
I approach the fair lady and place my hand on her low back.
I swallowed some saliva, dreading the impending cringe, and I said,
Roll for grapple.
He rolled a 17. Not bad. More than enough to place his hand on her back. I continue.
As she feels your hand on her back, she jumps forward, screams, and drops hot tea on a gashing wound.
What's wrong with you? Go away! Don't you see I'm a woman of God?
He continued his advances.
Come on, woman. I can make you feel like a true female. A bit sinful Esther's never hurt anyone.
Then he got closer to her. This was getting weird, so I decided to abort the cringe bomb by rolling a kick in the nuts. Natural 14. Yes, very low roll, but enough to make Schopen-Beard's character flinch, and the nun escaped. He abruptly said to me,
Hey, what the hell, OP? Don't you see she was into me?
You cock-blocked me, I cock-block you. Sweet revenge. I reply as GM.
What did you expect?
I chase after her.
I was growing increasingly annoyed, so I say in the best stern voice.
No, you cannot.
He got angry.
What the hell? Why not?
Trying to avoid a shouting match, I said,
Fine, roll for athletics.
Damn it, you half-orc wizard. He rolled a 19. This is not over. I thought to myself. Then I said,
You are able to chase her, but reach the metal door of a small convent. It looks warded by holy magic.
He questioned me profusely.
Are there windows?
I replied, trolling him at this point.
Yes, but very high.
He scoffed, and with a smug look, he said,
I roll athletics to climb.
Go ahead. You have to pass a skill check of 25. Hurry up, because the guards are coming for you after that scandal.
He rolled a 25, so I said,
You climb, but before reaching the window, hot oil is poured on you for 1d4 damage. Time for a saving throw to see if you fall.
He rolled a 5. In a half-smug, cocky tone, I said,
You fall while trying to scratch the walls and fall for 1d6 damage.
He said angrily,
What?
That's not all. You get arrested for disturbing the peace and get the party thrown out of the outpost.
They all said to me,
Oh, come on.
Aw, come on.
Sad for the rest of the party, I said.
You can still make camp on the outskirts.
They did, and after the awkward silence, they all retired to their respective tents. Oh, but Schopen-Beard had one more beardy trick. He said,
I sneak into the outpost.
You haven't done enough? I thought to myself, but decided to indulge him. He would be punished for derailing the campaign, and maybe even put him in his place. I said,
Please do roll for sneak.
He rolled a 14. Not bad, but not great. So I said to him,
You barely made it unnoticed. What do you do?
with smugness, he said,
I murder the guards who casted us out.
and with a poker face, I said,
Very well. As you approach the unsuspecting guards in their tent, you hear various heavy gallops encircling the outpost. After a short while, the screaming began, and as you looked at your surroundings, you feel a bag over your head, and some unseen horror kidnaps you.
He gets angry again, and he says,
No, you can't do that, OP. Why are you being such a
Before continuing, I gotta make a trigger warning for sexual assault. You have been warned twice now. I said,
Oh, it gets better. As the bag is lifted from your head, you see yourself strapped to a tree, naked, and in a small, shall we say, canine position. Then you see the mysterious figures, a whole party of 20 centaurs. Each of them gets some special time with you and leave you there.
He hid his anger and laughed, trying to hide his feelings. We were silent. The story moved on. The party later found him starved on the same tree. They untied him and kept on going south. At this point, they were all tired, so I ended the session. After some short goodbyes, we each went our separate ways. That was the last session of the campaign, in part thanks to Schopen-Beard's antics and life in general. After this encounter, my exposure to Schopen-Beard gradually diminished, since he met a group of neckbeard theologians just like him. So, he started to stick to them and not to me, thank God. Still, I had one more noteworthy encounter that intersects my story of my very own legbeard stalker. Until next time, the final part of the Schopen-Beard saga, the epilogue. Thank you guys very much for joining me for this edition of the Neckbeard Experience, Schopen-Beard. We got one more to go, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this. My throat is very sore because this was very long, but I think it was really fun. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons. You guys are wonderful, and I appreciate your help. And also a special thanks to Elron the Dark One. You can follow him on Reddit in the link below. Again, thank you guys for joining me. And until next time, this is Dallas, signing off.